Hi, I'm Gianno Maliani,
Hi, I'm Cassidy Cunningham, right?
and this is the book review video for Dr. Hunter's PPHS course 1200 Winter Quarter. In this video, we're not exactly going to be quoting anything from the books that we both read, but we are going to be paraphrasing. We don't want to have to continuously look back at our books.
Mm-hmm.
For my book, I read Medical Bondage, Race, Gender, and a History of Gynecology.
I read Heavy, an American Memoir by Kies Lemon.
So, in my book, the primary topic is the exploitation of black women as well as all women. Yeah, black women and all women in the mid 19th century. And it very heavily touches on how unwilling these subjects were. I mean, these were slave women who were brought over and who were being, not only had to work completely to death, really, but they also had to have experiments done on their bodies without their consent. And the main doctors that he talks about are, the primary doctor that he discusses is forgive me.
Deirdre.
Deirdre discusses, is James Sims, Dr. James Sims, and he's often known as the father of modern gynecology. So, there are a lot of things talked about as far as the exploitation, but not only were they used as test subjects, but they were also used as nurses. They were used as to clean up after. It was, of course they were getting experience of the learning process, but
they were being treated as tools.
Exactly.
It's not like they were being taught those skills to be able to use them in the future. They were never intended to be able to go out on their own.
They didn't even think that they probably could.
Yeah.
It was just that much of a racist ideology that these poor women were seen as less than human. They were just seen as guinea pigs.
When I read the book, because I have read it, I read both books. It really stood out to me just how he didn't even talk about them like they were human beings. He didn't provide them with anesthesia because he didn't think that they needed it, because he felt that black women, although he didn't exactly refer to them as black women, didn't need pain medication, that they could handle that kind of pain.
Whereas white women couldn't. It almost made me kind of sick when I was reading it. And I was reminded of the U2 movement that's going on.
Me Too.
Is it Me Too?
U2's a band.
Oh, forgive me. Me Too movement. Where, women are finally coming forward and they're accusing and they're finally bringing to light their rapists. And that's generally what this was. This was rape.
Yes, rape of their bodies. And in some cases, I'm sure also physical rape simply for their experiments. And it does tie into the Me Too movement, especially with how a lot of the women now who are coming forward, they're not coming forward about just everyday harassment as much, though some are. Most of the, or at least well-known cases, are about women who are coming forward because men in power, men who had some sort of control over them, or were in a position to where if women did not consent or do what they said, then they would have face the consequences, while the men face none.
Nothing.
And that is similar to the book, because it's a lack of power. And
women in poverty, women with, very little connection with, who just had zero value in their eyes.
And also, coming back to the Me Too movement, is some of the men, like Harvey Weinstein. He was so powerful, and a lot of that power, a lot of Bill Cosby's power was built off the backs of women. He hurt those women and was still so powerful that when things came out about them, people were willing to say, oh, well, this person is so righteous in a way, well known, that They could never do that. So this was a man. These were men who gained their power through the exploitation of women. Just like those women, that man is known as Dr. Sims is known as the father of modern gynecology. But the only reason that any of those experiments ever happened was because he exploited slave women and Irish women and used them without permission, without consent. And they, for many years, were not recognized. We don't know many of their names.
I think there were only 3 names that were actually mentioned.
Exactly. They're not known in history. They are the true mothers of gynecology, because without what happened to them, a lot of that would never be known.
Now, let me ask you this.
Not until later.
So, these experiments that they were performing, these abominable experiments, did in fact contribute to
Gynecology.
massive leaps in gynecology. I mean, modern women today can have these procedures done, and some save lives, some will ensure longer lives. It's no doubt medicine isn't it's neither evil nor good. It's who uses it.
Yes.
Now let me ask you this. I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you think that if it was gone about a different way, we would have made such progress?
I think that ties back to the Nazi experiments, and people talk about that all the time, especially, I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Mengele,
yes. His experiments, and how, yes, they did teach us information that was super vital, but is it worth it, for one? And two, the fact is, a lot of people willingly subject themselves to experiments because they believe in medicine, or because they're sick themselves, or for many other reasons. And that's not what either of those things were. To say that they wouldn't have happened naturally, it may have taken longer, most assuredly. It would have taken longer. But some of the information may have been more accurate, because Dr. Sims, they believed that black women didn't feel pain, that they didn't need as much anesthesia. And that is still affects black women today when they ask for pain medication.
And that ties back into your book.
It does. And it's even, sometimes you have to make the choice between humanity and science. And when you're given that choice, humanity should win. So that's my personal opinion. And it's just because I believe that as time went on, everything he discovered could have been discovered. And some of it, quite frankly, was already known. It was just known by midwives and by women. And that wasn't going to be acknowledged by doctors at the time. And they would have found out much of the information through other ways in the future that would have included the exploitation of powerless women.
Do you think that this also contributes to today's modern view of the nursing profession, where a lot of these other black women were acting as nurses during these operations and acting as, for lack of a better word, just being slave-driven? They weren't treated as a medical professional. Do you think that plays into today's modern view of nursing, where people? I know that, me personally, I believe nurses don't deserve or don't get half the respect they deserve.
That's true.
But it's without a doubt that in today's society, people definitely put more weight into the medical field if you're talking about a doctor.
Okay.
People feel that doctors are the ones who are doing the most, but actually, in my opinion, from my experiences, I've seen that nurses do primarily most of the work.
Yeah, from what I found, it's like doctors do a lot of the diagnosing. They have a broader depth of knowledge.
But nurses are more practical.
Nurses are the ones doing the hands-on work. They're the ones actually spending time with you. I don't know if this particular situation contributed to that. I know that it's been a historical practice that, sadly as it might seem, when men start to find interest in a field, it starts to gain value. When it's a women's field, it has no value. That's honestly how it has always been. We see it with computers. which computers used to simply be, quite frankly, women. And NASA, they were all women. And then when that became recognized as an important field, and men started coming into it, to technology, into I can't remember what the word is called.
Engineering?
Engineering, and well, not just engineering, but
Technical development?
no, when they are creating the system.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
can't remember what it's called, that computers and such use. Then it suddenly became a field that was worthwhile. And all
I never
those
thought of it like that, actually. Yeah, and even today, if you think of nurse, you think, oh, a woman.
Mm-hmm. And even though, another thing, it's found in teaching too. I read a study, I believe 2 or 3 years ago that came out that looked at lots of different career fields and found that women, fields that are female dominated, like nursing and teaching, even when they are female dominated, men in those fields will move up higher and faster and be given more authority than women.
Just another example of sexism.
Yes.
That obviously it's to a lesser extent
Mm-hmm.
today, but it's still very much viable.
You can see it in how principals, deans, superintendents tend to be men, how charge nurses and such. I don't know if it necessarily ties specifically to Dr. Neil, but just he definitely didn't help the situation.
So another thing is that in this book, they not only talk about black women being exploited, but they also talk about Irish women being exploited.
Which, as someone of Irish descent, that's is something that historically there's a lot of controversy over. Not that Irish women were exploited in this case, but the fact that Irish women and black women were definitely seen as both being more equal to each other than to other white people. That did depend drastically, obviously, on where you lived. If you were in the north, you were probably more likely to the Irish women and black women were definitely closer to being equal than if they were in the south.
But again, it just ties back into the whole thing you were talking about. People in positions of low connections, low power,
Mm-hmm.
impoverished demographics.
Yeah.
When these Irish women came over, they had nothing to their names, and
Exactly.
as such, they were also viewed as less than human.
Mm-hmm.
Just another pawn to be played.
That still happens today, not with Irish women per se. I don't know if it happens to Irish women at all, but women from the Philippines who go to work in Saudi Arabia and men too, aren't seen as being fully human. In Iran, I believe it was Iran, they had, and in India they have such specific classes that you're either in or you're out. And if you're out, then it's not that you're a different class, it's that, you aren't human. And so it's that these divisions that we created are just...
So what was your book about?
I read Heavy by K. Simon, and it's a personal memoir of his. He starts when he's 11 years old and spans 25 years and through a lot. One thing to really show you, that I found this book is it's really a bookend, the beginning to the end. It's a letter to his mother. The entire book starts with her and ends with her. One thing in particular that stood out to me that really shows how it is all about her is the first real memory he talks about when he's 11 years old and at the slot machines with his mom. And how at that point he was given, I believe it was $5 or $10, and he did not put it in the slot machines, even though she told him, he could. He didn't, and he used it for something else. But then the last time he sees her, up to when this book came out at least, it's at a casino where he had just lost $10,000 and was meeting her after having stolen $10 from his girlfriend's purse, although they're ex-girlfriend now. And was at the casino thinking that he could turn that $10 into a few hundred, to help make up for the money he lost. And she was they were gambling together and such, and then he told her, she told him that he needed to get help and that she needed to get help. And so it just kind of, it shows
Comes
how,
full circle.
in the worst way possible. Afterwards, the book does continue a bit past that, and how he does reach out and try and get better, and he ended up not spending that last bit of money that he had, gave it to a different woman, and went home to his grandmother and quit his job and just really ended his life. But it's a really interesting book and how much forgiveness he's willing to give his mother, because he talks so much about all the gifts she gave him, and what he almost seems to brush over the fact that she was extremely abusive to him. She would beat him horribly whenever he did anything that she didn't agree with. He does confront her about this, and that last time they're together at the casino. And the only reason he confronts her is because she starts saying that he abused her by lying to him and lying to her. And he says that he never really lied to her.
So it's just this vicious circle.
Yeah, where
they lie to each other. And
is willing to. She absolves herself of any abuse that she gave because he lied to her, and she simply, every time he asks, "Well, didn't you abuse me? Did you abuse me?" She says no, because he abused her by lying. And it's an interesting. I don't know if I know, a part of me would like to say I wouldn't be able to forgive my mother if I was in that position, but another part of me says it's hard not to. Because she did do some really amazing things. She was an accomplished author, a writer. She was a professor, multiple postbaculates, a doctorate.
Especially for a black woman at the time.
Yes, because yes, in the 70s and 80s. So.
Okay.
She was very accomplished, well respected, but she would gamble away all of her income, so they were always poor. But she would help him with any of his papers that he had to do whenever he was struggling with that. She'd sit him down and teach him to revise them and to talk about what he wanted to talk about. And she taught him how to read and really made that love of books flourish. But it just...
And then the writing of a book himself.
Yes, but does that really make up for everything she did? And I think that's a vital question. It's like,
honestly,
you get to bounce out.
I mean, child abuse is still something that goes on today. I mean, it's not only is it deplorable, but it leads to a lot of it leads into a vicious cycle, like with the gambling, like with the lying. If you beat your kid, it's very likely that they're going to beat theirs. It gets instilled in them, and then it just creates this long line of
abuse.
Yeah.
So
you also said that he developed an eating disorder.
He did. It's when he was young. It started with eating all the time because at one point he says he went to go eat cakes because cakes never fought back or yelled at him or scared him.
Filling the void.
Yes.
Finding something that won't hurt you.
And part of that is most definitely due to the fact that there were many times in his childhood where they did not have food in the home. At one point, he talks about he ends up drinking alcohol, and he mainly drank the alcohol to drink the alcohol, but he tells the therapist when his mom says, "I'm going to see the therapist," that was because there's nothing else in the house, which at times that was true. His mom gambled. There wasn't always food. And he, at another point, that even ties into one time when he went to visit his father, who lived in a different state and didn't bother to visit him except for very, very rarely, and then once as an adult. His grandmother gave him his money to give to his father to get them food and everything. And one of his thoughts was, why is she giving him money, food, when we don't have food? And so he would gain weight, and he got quite high at points, over 300 pounds, considerably over. And then when he was in college, his first quarter, he gained 50 pounds in 3 months. And then after that, he turned it around, dropped down to 165, which for someone who's about 6'5", that's quite low.
Oh, yeah.
And he actually felt so ill at 165 that it was destroying his body. Ended up in the hospital. Didn't know how to deal with the fact that he had so many unhealed fractures and stuff from running and such. And it was, rather than finding a healthy balance, he turned back to eating a lot, to gaining weight. And at the end of the book, I believe he's at about 319 pounds.
So he was an impoverished Black child in a poor neighborhood, or?
Yes, he did live in a poor neighborhood. When he was growing up, he went to an all-Black Catholic school.
Okay.
But then that got shut down, and so him and a few other students moved to the all-white Catholic school for a senior
How did
year.
that affect him?
That, he said, that was him and his classmates. They had to deal with one of his classmates, for instance, apparently smelled, according the teacher told us. He said that to the students who attended school with him, he didn't smell any different going to the school than the previous school.
Yeah.
He just smelled like him. But the teacher actually asked them to talk to the other student, about taking showers every night and every morning. And because he was stinky.
So just again plays into the racist factors, the desolation, the isolation.
Yes, a lot of the isolation, and just
Sure, that didn't help. What was going on at home?
No, it's one thing that really stood out is his mother had some on and off relationships with the men. Specifically, one of the men specifically was all about Black power and such. Which
so like a
Malcolm X fan and such. Which on the one hand you're like, okay, good. But
yes.
the way he went about it was extremely
radical.
Yes, and in a way that was unhealthy for Kies, the author. And the relationship that he had with his mother was very unhealthy and such. And just his mother, he had a white girlfriend at one point, and he didn't tell his mother for the longest time because he knew what she would say.
Again, lying. Exactly.
Oh, but the point is, when she did find out, he got in really bad trouble of the physical kind with his mother. And so it's like, so on the one hand, you can understand it. It's like, is it fair to really punish a child for lying when if they tell you the truth, they're gonna. And
you gotta survive. You have to.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it's just he goes through that a lot. He ends up getting accepted into a very fancy private white college in his city after high school on a scholarship. And he does okay, but him and the other Black students at the school are constantly being accused of plagiarizing really badly. He gets called in to write an article. He doesn't really write it for him. Has a relationship with a girl who's also with a doctor in another state, and just spends a lot of his time kind of finding himself having to be the person who talks about like power versus privilege and such. And he does bring up how he doesn't see why they call it privilege instead of power, but that's later. And just he ends up actually being. They have the white students from the fraternities on campus end up coming out in black wigs and blackface and dancing around them, calling them bad words, and it ends up causing tension with his girlfriend afterwards, actually a Black girl, because she felt that he was getting more attention for it than her, which he didn't want any attention for it. But the school punished him and her. Yeah, the school punished him and her rather than the other students, because of the bad press that they were getting and such. And he actually ended up getting kicked out of the school because he took a book from the library without checking it out. And the dean told him that if he had shown that video of him taking the book out of the library without checking it out to the cops, he would have been arrested. Which is, quite frankly, no, not really realistic. Cops in that area may have. He did grow up in Jackson, Mississippi. But realistically, knows if it had been a white student, if you had walked into a library and accidentally or on purpose taken a book out without checking it out, they would not
That made
have
such a big
arrested you.
deal.
They wouldn't have arrested you, let alone kicked you out.
Yeah.
And he, one thing that stood out to me is he was so shocked that he ended up getting suspended because he kept expecting his teachers to stand up for him, because his mother would have, and his mother's coworkers would have. But she also taught at a school that had black professors, and like he mentions at one point that in his K through 12 education, he had one black teacher, but he went to, except for 2 years, he went to all black schools. And it's just how that really affects who you are, because it's who you're writing at and who you're writing for all of his assignments.
So, I guess with both of these books, while the time period, while the victim or victims, it, even though it's a different span of time, one during the Civil War, one only, 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
To recently, about starting, I want to say in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, it's still showing this pattern of racism, this existence, and
this erasure of black accomplishments. At one point in the book, he when he was going up for tenure, the board who did that wrote an email saying that they thought, to someone else, accidentally sent it to his girlfriend, saying that they thought he was making up the fact that he got a graduate degree. And it's just, and then with the nurses, with the patients, we're also nurses and stuff, it's just an erasure of their accomplishments. And it's just, it does really, it shows you that, yes, there have definitely been changes, but not enough has changed for black people, poor people in America.
People without power.
Yes.
All right, well, again, I'm Gianno Maliani.
And I'm Cassidy Cunningham, right?
And once again, the books were Heavy and Medical Bondage. And we hope you enjoyed this small talk we had. Have a great day.